All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start this board briefing. This is our July 29th, 2026. We have quite kind of a thick agenda, at least some in-depth stuff. So I might have to speed us up or, move us along if we get too late. And we'll have a break in the middle. So welcome. And today's first, if you haven't, please sign it. Is there a guest book up there that should read? Please sign it in. If you don't have one, okay. Our first presentation is going to be the airport.
No, it's
No.
Randy.
Randy, is he online? Oh. That's why I was confused because I see these fine people in front of us.
There maybe some of his people online, I'm sure.
Angela Long.
Hi.
Hi. Is somebody set to besides Randy to present?
I'm sorry.
Is she online for?
I'm online for Randy,
She's
sorry.
online for what Randy was
Okay. Does anybody set up to do the presentation? Randy is not here.
I can manage the presentation if I have access.
Perfect.
But it says that I'm not allowed to share. So someone has to give me access to
Yep,
this.
that's happening.
Present. Thank you. And is everybody able to see my screen okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay, well, thank you so much for allowing us to come today and present on Tillamook County's 2026 Energy Resiliency Plan. My name is Angela Long. I'm the CEO of Rockcrest Consulting. I have Tatiana Beck and Ryan Long here who are part of the Rockcrest team who helped put together this plan for the county and can also help answer any questions that might come up. And then also in the room, I think we have Casey and Joanna from Tillamook PUD.
Yep.
Okay. And they can help answer.
They're
any
waving
questions.
at us.
Okay. They can help answer any questions because they were a critical part of this plan.
Great.
I think Randy said we had about 20 minutes, but I know you have a full agenda, so we can leave you with the presentation as a takeaway, but I'll try to highlight the things that I think are most important. So this slide agenda, to give you some background, has our vision, outage analysis that we did with Tillamook PUD, some strategic insights that we found from the data that we did as part of the project, and then data around critical facilities within your county, the community engagement we did, and then what we're calling a 4-quadrant analysis, where we broke the county into 4 areas to come up with recommendations for energy resiliency and specifically around community resiliency hubs. And then there is a part of this plan that requires us to look ahead at pathways for funding. So some quick background on this project. This is, Randy was issued a grant through the Oregon Department of Energy to build the energy resiliency plan. There is a policy that requires energy resiliency planning at the county level, and that required the state to implement a grant program so counties could have funding to do that work. There are very specific requirements within the policy for certain things that needed to be part of the plan. So you'll see a mix of that. And then you'll also see a mix of work that we did that we thought was very important for the county, things like community engagement and stuff like that. So this is intended to be a living document. Randy will come back at some point to get the plan adopted to be part of the natural hazard mitigation plan. So this is the first time we've ever done the plan. We think of this as being a blueprint and really hopefully a roadmap to getting funding to do some of the projects that are recommended. So part of this work, we met with 3 different types of partners within the county. We met with households, individuals, so going to the county fair. We talked to critical facilities, hospitals, businesses, and then emergency response teams as well. And we asked them to define what energy resiliency looks like for the county. And the vision that we came up with based on their feedback is essential services continue uninterrupted during disruptions, communities are protected from prolonged outages, and local energy systems are reliable, resilient, and ready to meet tomorrow's challenges. So we took that as our kind of guiding vision for how we did our work. One thing I want to point out, I'm sure you know all the statistics about your county, how many residents there are. But one thing I want to point out to you is that when we think of the the natural hazard mitigation plan, we think about exposures like landslides, tsunamis, things like that. But when we think about energy resiliency, we really want to think about energy hazards. So what's going to affect the power going into our critical facilities? That includes natural hazards, but it also includes things like man-made hazards, someone running into a pole, aging infrastructure, things like that. So we have this term that we coined energy hazards when we think about energy resiliency. I just want to give a huge shout out to Tillamook PUD. They're in the state, about half of the counties are building an energy resiliency plan, and many of them really struggle to find a good partnership or groove with their utilities. And Tillamook PUD stepped up from the moment that Randy got the grant. They participated in this and were a real partner and played a key critical role in developing this. And so I want to just highlight some of the things that we heard from the community. We heard from many community members that they expressed really strong confidence in Tillamook PUD, not just to provide reliable service, but also their strong communications during routine operations in times of disruption. So I just thought I'd highlight that. One of the requirements of the policy, HB 3630, I believe is the specific policy, was to look at social vulnerability within the county. So we did mapping and looked at all the census tracts in your county, and we identified that 55% of your census tracts are moderate to high social vulnerability. So what that means is that communities in your area have demographic and socioeconomic factors like lack of access to transportation, crowded housing, poverty, and other stresses as well. So that's an important factor when we think about energy resiliency, is how people are going to be able to withstand a major weather event, for example. We looked at about 5 years of outage data from Tillamook County PUD, Tillamook PUD, and identified 3 different areas of outages. So outages less than 24 hours, the utility is restoring power within 24 hours, 93% of the time. 7% of the time, that's between 1 and 7 days. Most of that's resolved within 3 days. And then 1% of the time, those outages are beyond 7 days. These categories of 24 hours, 1 to 7 days, and beyond 7 days were originally proposed in legislation last year. There was a bill that was going to extend the grant funding and add a couple more requirements around energy resiliency for the state. It did not pass, but it did define outages in these terms. So that's where we started, is mapping up the data to that policy. What we found in reality when we looked at the outage data, we found that outages don't occur within those buckets in Tillamook County. We looked at what caused those outages, and 63% of the time, those are things like natural hazards, so windstorms, things like that. But 20% of the time is aging infrastructure. So the need to replace poles and wires, equipment at the substation level. And that's really important to think about. How do you kind of future-proof the county for energy resiliency? Is not only do you have this factor of extreme weather or natural hazards, you also have to think about the infrastructure that you have in your county and making sure that that's resilient and hardened for your residents and your businesses. So after we looked at outages and we looked at social vulnerability, we did look at reframing the outage categories to match when they actually occur within the county. So moving that medium term from 1 to 7 days to 1 to 3 days to match real world conditions in your county. And then we wanted to look for ways that we could help so one of the things we found, sorry, is that most people's preparedness matches the outages that they experience. So most people are going to be prepared for 1 day because that's what they experience 93% of the time. Then they're going to probably be prepared for up to 3 days because those are the longest outages they usually experience. But beyond that, people are not prepared. And if they have a major event, they want to shelter in place. They want to be at their homes with their families and their community. And so these findings helped us come up with different strategies based on your individual communities in your area. I kind of already mentioned this, so I won't go over it, but there is this preparedness cliff, like I mentioned, that beyond 3 days, most people were not feeling prepared. The other thing that we identified within our analysis, this was a requirement of HB 3630, was to look at the consumption of all of your critical facilities in your county. And so we did that mapping with the help of Tillamook PUD and identified key critical public services that could have investments made and if there was a natural hazard or an energy hazard. So grocery stores, medical, water and wastewater, police, fire, and evacuation sites. And these sites could be recommended as a project. So if you want to go get funding like through Energy Trust of Oregon, they have their custom microgrid incentive right now that has been released that you're eligible to apply for as a county. You could pick a grocery store in one of the quadrants and put a microgrid in that area. Based on this analysis that we had, you'll be able to size that piece of equipment. I mentioned the different groups of stakeholders that we reached out to. The reason why we wanted to distinguish between these stakeholder groups or these partners is because they have different needs. Somebody at home has a different need than a business might have, and they can play different roles. So we heard a lot from community members when we did outreach. We did outreach through surveys, in person, and we heard from people that they want to help their community. They would be willing if there was an event to, be a communication hub and then provide communication to their neighbors or go check on their neighbors. We heard a lot of that willingness to support. We also heard a lot of people who had concerns around tourists coming in coming into the county. And if there was some sort of event, how could they support them? How could they help them? Because you have a lot of tourists who are camping, who may be just there for the day. So if there was an event and they couldn't get out of the county, how could they help them? And so those types of things we heard a lot from what we call the local and household group. Economic and countywide, we heard those same things, but we heard them more in a way of like, I'm a resource that I can provide communications at my building, or I can provide refrigeration for medicine, or, they had resources in place. We even heard ideas around, I have a bunch of trucks and I can help move equipment or move food throughout the county if there was an event. And then our health and safety, those critical facilities, We heard a lot of those similar things, but more focused on how do we sustain power during any kind of event so we can provide critical services. One thing that we asked as part of that community engagement is how long people had backup power for. Most people had backup power, at least a surprising amount of people and had backup power, but that backup power was only, 1 day or 24 hours or up to 3 days, could not sustain beyond that typical outage that they see. Many of your critical facilities have done formal energy assessments to see what it would take to be fully resilient during an event. It's about 29%, but there's still a lot of opportunity for you to work with critical facilities to identify where there may be areas that they can invest in, whether that's, communication protocols, that's backup power, that's having the right resources in place. And then we had, as part of our survey, asked people if they'd be interested in installing solar or battery as for backup power. And we had about 68% of people who said that they would be willing to do that if the county had some program or some offering or the state did. I already mentioned the shelter in place and the battery, solar and battery, but I do want to mention something that the surveys and the outreach that we did last year happened at the same time that there was the tsunami warning or the tsunami evacuation. And that really, we ended up going to the fair right after that happened, and that was top of mind for a lot of people. They had a real life experience with getting communication during that time, worrying about where they were going to go, how they were going to evacuate. And so I just want to point out a lot of the feedback that we got as part of this study was informed by an actual event that happened to occur right at that time. Luckily, there was no, catastrophic damage from the tsunami or anything like that, but it did help inform some of the findings because people were actively trying to think about evacuating and stuff like that. So here's our 4-quadrant analysis. We broke up the county into the northern part of the county down to about Bay City here, and then the Tillamook City area all the way down to Tatiana. I don't remember kind of what our dividing point here was for mapping, so feel free to jump in. But this quadrant 2, then quadrant 3 down to the southern area. And then 4 is just basically all inland beyond the major metropolitan areas. Do you want to add anything to this, Tatiana?
Yeah, we basically split up the coastal quadrants by population. So the North County line to Garibaldi has a similar population to the southernmost quadrant, Tierra del Mar to the South County line. And then obviously the central coastal quadrant with Tillamook has the highest population.
So these quadrants are used to come up with our recommendations for how to invest in those areas for resiliency. And I would say, I didn't ask this earlier, but if anybody from Tillamook PUD wants to add anything to that first part of the presentation, feel free to jump in. But I won't put you on the spot because I can't see you. So quadrant 1, what we call the North Coastal, we're recommending that Manzanita be a primary site for a microgrid or solar plus battery that could also be situated at the distribution level. So we're thinking like utility scale investment there. I think that there is already a project, a community resiliency hub that has been proposed or is in the works there. And I see Randy's online too now. So Randy, feel free to jump in, but that's a really viable spot to make an investment to help with community resiliency. Our central coastal area, we had what we're calling the Tillamook Hub Network. It's a couple different strategies. It's putting in a community resiliency hub, so a microgrid solar plus battery that could be at a school, that could be someplace where people could come to get communication, refrigeration, but also knowing that people are likely going to want to shelter in place, having some strategies where people have resources that they can do that. And I think Randy's already done some thinking around, how he might be able to provide different types of products or things like that for people, whether that's like flashlights or food or setting up different cache sites for people to go get resources. And the other thing that we're thinking about with this hub network is having some sort of social network. So a lot of people said that they'd be willing to go check on neighbors, provide communication, but really building that infrastructure out and having a group of volunteers who would be there to support your members of your community who are the most vulnerable. So somebody who's medically dependent on oxygen and can't leave their home, or maybe they have some sort, they're older and they can't leave their home, or they have a disability and they can't leave. The last part of your county, the social along the coast, the south coastal area, does not actually have a good site at all for any kind of community resiliency hub. There's too many vulnerabilities there. Things around liquefaction, seismic shaking, landslides that would just make it too high of a risk to put any sort of utility scale battery or solar. So instead, what we're recommending is for that area of your community to provide resources for people to shelter in place for at least 72 hours. There is only one real way to get in and out of that part of the county. And so if there was a landslide or flooding or anything like that, even if people wanted to leave, there is a risk that they wouldn't be able to. So just kind of knowing that and being able to put the infrastructure in place for them to shelter in place is important. And then the last quadrant that we have, the inland quadrant, it's not a high population area, but it is a place where you do have a lot of forest workers, tourists, people coming in and out of the county. So we recommend putting a infrastructure in place for a community resiliency hub at the Tillamook Forest Center. And that could be a site where if you have people coming in and out of the area, you could have a place for people to shelter in place there. And I think I missed this on quadrant 3. And so if Casey's there, I'd like to open it up for him to say anything. But quadrant 3 is going to be really important for you to think about having grid hardening around the county, just in case it's hard to get in and out of there. So making sure that you have quadrant 2 has, newer infrastructure, poles and wires that might need to be buried to harden the grid, things like that. So making more investments around the county will also help that area be able to have power restored quickly. I won't go over this because this is just a little snapshot of what I shared, so you can have one place to look at all of the recommendations. And then looking ahead, this was a requirement of HB 3630 to have potential pathways for funding. And I'll just mention again, Energy Trust has their custom microgrid incentive right now that the county could apply for. And because your population is under 50,000, you would get up to 50% of funding for that and up to $400,000. So really worth taking advantage of that if the county has funds to make a project happen. Another requirement of HB 3630 is that this be integrated into the natural hazard mitigation plan, like I mentioned, and that you do continuous monitoring and evaluation. So this plan is expected to be updated and refreshed. So Randy will come to you at some point to have you adopt the plan. Then that'll get integrated to the natural hazard mitigation plan, and then be updated in 3 years when the natural hazard mitigation plan needs to be updated. So that natural hazard mitigation plan gets updated every 5 years. But you'll be on a short cycle now just because of the timing. Okay, that was a lot. And so I'll pause there and ask if you have any questions.
Mrs. Scar.
It's super interesting. First time I've thought about pretty much any of it that way. So, yeah, for me, I'm sitting here thinking about the county's role, thinking about PUD's role, thinking about our local community's role. Just the state's role, all of that just swirling around in my head. So like I said, it's good information, but for me, it's just kind of a moment. So maybe my fellow commissioners have been thinking about it longer than I have.
I appreciate the work of Rockcrest and Randy and the team, our partners from PUD. Thank you. I think it's good work. It's interesting. Because I'm involved in the preparedness efforts locally, I clearly see the overlaps, but it's another facet. I think there are multiple facets of preparedness, and this is a very important facet. And I appreciate the focus on this because I don't personally remember, we may have had a plan like this that was outdated, but I haven't been involved in the development of one, so I'm sure it was high time.
Okay, great. I concur with both your statements. And I do have a question for Angela. Angela, you, and I'm going to paraphrase, but you made a comment of confidence breeds ill preparedness. And I'm just wondering if that's just your general findings, or are you specifically talking about Tillamook County? Because I find the opposite true in where I live, but I'm just curious if that is just industry-wide or countrywide, or if that was specific to Tillamook County.
So Tillamook County is actually one of the first counties to really do a plan like this. And this finding of people being as prepared as they experience outages is been very interesting to a lot of people. And we've actually been asked to share Tillamook's plan nationally at a couple of different conferences, and then here locally too through Sustainable Northwest. They had an emergency manager and resiliency forum. So it is getting a lot of attention, and we're even finding that larger IOUs, investor-owned utilities, are coming to us to ask, how did Tillamook PUD work with you to get this data? How did the county work? And wanting to replicate this work. So I think you should be really proud of laying the groundwork. Like we had the pleasure of helping you do this, but this really is a culmination of your county and the people who work in it and live there. So I just want to recognize that.
I appreciate that. And I guess we're pretty close to being out of time for this topic. But one of the things that I want to say too, I think this type of work is really important for me as we face regulations. And to me, this shows the importance of making sure we continue to have a reliable hydropower to keep our confidence up while we are developing these microgrids. But I think this is one of the things when I hear these things, and then we have certain state agencies coming down, and I feel like this is a really good way of saying, yeah, but we do need to prepare, but we also need to make sure that the grid is healthy and we have a good supply of affordable, clean power. So I appreciate that work.
Yeah, and the redundancy too, because of and Casey can speak to this, but if, I think 93% of your power comes in from BPA on the transmission level, and you don't have, you have electric and delivered fuels. So having that redundancy of other clean, affordable power that you mentioned is going to be important if you don't have power coming from BPA. So it gives you that energy independence as well.
I think it's all part of the puzzle. So
Something more to put on our to-do list, or maybe it can be on PUD's to-do list, and we can just help.
For example, I mean, I have a solar generator and I have a propane generator. And so I can function for more than 72 hours based on those two things alone. So I love these ideas of PUD or the state because the county doesn't have the money. So here you go. This is one of these great discussions where
Right, or the
we have to-
capacity.
where the capacity is to help fund programs so folks can get a little 1,500 watt solar generator like I have, or, and then families can get together. Anyway, it's really good for discussion to get us prepared for this. So
For sure. And the preparedness cliff is a funny phrase that I jotted down. And I thought it was very interesting that you were talking about identifying that we're prepared for 3 days here, which is true of my household. Like up to 3 days, you know, I'm fine. Beyond 3 days, and I fall off that cliff. It's absolutely true. And I was thinking, well, we can definitely work on that with community preparedness groups. And you know, that's kind of low hanging fruit. But I thought, oh, you didn't interview me, but that would be absolutely true of me. 3 days, that's it.
Yeah,
Great.
Commissioners, I wanted to make one comment about the plan too, that I really liked is with Angela and her group identifying these microgrids and where they should be placed. And then we're looking at placing other types of resiliency hubs. And to me, we shouldn't have them in separate places. So that's what I really like here. So they identify where they're at. So when we start thinking of these big resiliency hubs, like what Orem is bringing in that, I think we need to I would really like us to look more of what Angela's identified of where we can put some microgrids too, because it doesn't make sense to have a nice resiliency hub and a nice 40-foot container of stuff over here, and there's no energy resiliency there. And so that's what I really liked about it, is her identifying that. So now I can look at that. And so if funding becomes available and other decisions are made, we can make a true resiliency hub with this, with the microgrid going there. And so, and that's the other thing I was doing. She mentioned a little bit, but I've been toying around with, smaller solar generators to see what they can power, what they can't power. And then over time, kind of stock them up like you do with the radio cache. So we have some things that we can send out to our vulnerable populations first. And that's what I was looking at too. And that fits right in with this energy plan and that. And so I really like that, because it just, to me, it's what we were missing before in our planning. And so I think this coming into our planning is a tremendous help for us. Like I say, we were missing it. And so this is great that we now have some good documentation to move forward with. We just have to start printing our own money, I guess, and we can move forward.
We'll get on that with those solar generators.
Thanks, Randy.
Well,
Thanks, Randy. Thank you,
Well,
Angela.
thank you. Yeah, thank you, commissioners. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I love Tillamook. I taught my son how to surf there. We hike and camp and spend a lot of time in your county. So I can't wait to continue to watch your projects and track this work and be part of it if I can. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
work. Appreciate that. All right. You need a break yet?
Not yet. I'm good. so
Are
far.
you okay?
Mhm.
Are you okay? You guys good? Okay. We will move on to our schedule 2:30 update, which is the ODAV PC Airport Overlay Zone permitting. Sarah Abshir, Community Development Director,
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon.
and Daniel, sorry.
Yes.
Daniel Kearns. And Brian.
Yes, so Mr. Kearns has joined us, and also from the Oregon Department of Aviation, Anthony Beach and Brandon Pike are here with us today.
Welcome.
So thank you all for making the long drive down. For those who may not know, Mr. Kearns also provides legal counsel to community development on land use related matters when needed. So we thought, just because this is a conversation we are hoping to progress and hopefully find some sort of resolution to at some point, it'd be good to just get everybody in the room. So just as a quick summary, there have been some discrepancies and differences between state airport planning rule requirements and state airport planning laws and what is adopted in our local land use ordinance. ODAB has provided us with copies of Oregon Administrative Rule 660-1330, which talks about airport transportation planning rule requirements. And in review of our Goal 12 element of our comprehensive plan, our comp plan policies are consistent with what is required for airport planning. And that is implemented through the Pacific City Airport Overlay Zone, which is an overlay zone with specific development standards, including different types of surfaces and boundaries that we have discussed prior about where and how development can occur on properties within the airport overlay zone, how tall structures can be. And all of this is in relation to the actual airport runway. And so part of what you have before you today is additional information that ODAP has provided, including maps with boundaries and depictions that will hopefully help the conversation move along. With that, there is a reference in OAR 660-1330, and that reference is to Oregon Revised Statutes 835 and 836. And I'm bringing this up because this is the piece where it specifically calls out local government land use plans and regulations to accommodate airport zones and uses. And in that, it talks about that we're required to have a land use program and ordinances that relate to airport planning. And what it specifically says in 2A is that local governments shall amend their comprehensive plan and land use regulations as required, not later than the first periodic review as described in ORS 197-628. And it talks about the directive of the Oregon Department of Aviation to work with local governments on that process. So, because we do not have digitized records, I went back to our last periodic review that occurred between 1998 and 2002. There was a periodic review task item from the Department of Land Conservation and Development that required us to do airport updates specifically to the airport, Pacific City Airport Overlay Zone, and those were completed. And our last periodic review, that process was completed through 2002. And since then, the department has not received notification from the Oregon Department of Aviation or the Land Conservation and Development requiring us to do any more amendments to our local zoning code to comply. With that, you are aware that Mr. Coulter recently received the no harm determination from the FAA. It's my understanding ODAP has some concerns about that and maybe some discrepancies or misinformation that was provided in that they'll probably want to talk about today. But in my correspondence with ODAP, which I'm excited to talk about today, is that just the question of whether or not ODAP is going to require us to move forward with code amendments based on that Division 660 and the Oregon Revised Statute I just recently named, and that has a state declaration of hazard been made for any airport development, or development around the airport, and if such a declaration has been made by ODAP, does it preempt local land use authority? So I think that question really gets at the heart of the permitting challenges that we have continued to all experience with our state partners and with our customers. So I will leave it there and hand the floor over to ODAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, Board of Commissioners, Tony Beach, State Airports Manager with the Oregon Department of Aviation. Thank you for having us. I did want to just run through, if I can quickly, this presentation. It's the first item in the packet, and I'm not sure if we're able to get the electronic version up on the screen, but
I don't know if Debbie, I'm not plugged into the.
Can I confirm the microphone's on? Okay.
but I can just run through it. We can flip through the paper packets. We did send over the electronic copies earlier this morning, but apologies for not getting that sooner in advance. The rest of the materials, we brought a ton of resources here, and we can reference these throughout discussion, but if I can just get through this first part. We are here today because we are asking for the Tillamook County to help protect the Pacific City State Airport and give just a little bit overview of the airport and the issues that Sarah also queued up very nicely. So thank you. And the airport was opened in July of 1951. It's the only paved runway within 16 miles or a 30-minute driving distance from Pacific City. So the nearest being the Tillamook Airport. And the airport has approximately 5 based aircraft and receives on average 2,000 annual operations every year. It is the only, it is an important and only modal connection to the national airspace system for that small community. And it serves its local residents. It's used for tourism, commerce, recreation, resiliency, and medevac and Coast Guard operations, as you can see in the photo on the right. The issue of encroachment or failing to prevent incompatible land uses is the #1 airport killer. And that's something that has been seen at airports across the country over decades or the better part of the century. So those airports, unfortunately, these days are not being replaced. And when that happens, their local communities lose their vital connection to the national airspace system. A little bit of history, about 10 or 11 years ago in the mid-2010s, the Department of Aviation and our State Aviation Board had lengthy discussions over some issues with obstructions, hazards, and encroachment. And we even pursued potentially selling or closing the Pacific City State Airport. Again, this was 10 or 11 years ago over the obstructions and hazards that existed then. On the right is just the cover page for an appraisal that we completed in 2017 to sell the airport for just $10 with the consideration that the airport remain open as a public use airport. And there were, from my recollection, I wasn't at the department at the time, but my understanding is there were no takers. And at the same time, the aviation community and the local community rallied to save the airport. So there's a couple of photos here of the Friends of Pacific City State Airport. And they have a huge presence at the airport. They do annual work parties to do maintenance and help us out. And just upkeep things like the restroom and the bike shed and other things on the airfield. Since then, the airport has continued to be more encroached with new obstructions, new hazards being built because they continue to be permitted. So these are structures that the code allows, but do not meet the federal standard for protecting the airspace around the airport. And so there are a couple of photos here of some recent and very tall residences that are within the transitional surface for the airport, which is not a compatible use in our airport land use compatibility guidebook. We've had a couple meetings recently about this. We had a town hall meeting with the community in Pacific City in June of 2024, and then with Tillamook County as well. And then in April 2025, we also met with you all, and you asked for additional information, and that's what we brought to you here today. The additional resources, including maps and other documents showing the extent of the obstructions around the airport.
Can I
And-
ask, in
yeah.
this page, what are we looking at in this page?
So we are looking at the runway in the middle, followed by the transitional surface, which is the kind of lighter blue color around the airport, and then a darker blue surface at the end, which is the approach surface. And then the kind of orange brown boxes are the expected obstructions based on some kind of general survey that has been completed, but additional surveys needed to confirm.
Okay, so those are obstructions that exist now, or, okay.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
So meanwhile, we have had those meetings, but meanwhile, new obstructions continue to be permitted. And as Ms. Absher mentioned, there was a recent permit that was issued for a 2-story residence, extremely close to the runway, potentially either within or very close to the primary surface, which is 125 feet away from the runway. Other residential or commercial buildings, poles, signs, advertisements, things that have been proposed in the approach surface that takes considerable amount of time for the department, for Brandon and me to, provide comment to or try to find ways to reduce that hazard. we spend considerable time every time these comes up, these developments come up. But we also run into issues where people are buying properties and they have this expectation that their development can continue when, you know, they later are surprised, unfortunately, that there are other issues that maybe they weren't aware of. So, so we are looking to get ahead of that issue where they're running into that confusion. Also, the state, so the airport needs some considerable maintenance and improvements. And the state is looking at spending around $1.5 million of state funding for drainage improvements, access control improvements, pavement maintenance, and other parking improvements. As you know, the airport floods about 3 times every year during the king tides. And there's a picture of the airport completely flooded in this image. There's also a picture, and I actually took this photo. This was a fly-in event, which is typically a really great thing. There's no public access for accessing the airfield at this airport. You either have to go through private properties or you have to go onto the runway, which we don't encourage because, as you can see on the left end of this image, this aircraft was just taxiing out and turning around to depart on the runway while, unfortunately, this woman was bringing 4 children across the runway to leave the fly-in event. So the aircraft departed seconds later, and you know, fortunately, there were no other issues. But this kind of thing, public protection is huge, and so we are looking at providing a dedicated airport access point so that people don't have to find their own way through private property onto the airport. Finally, the last image here. This is just a conceptual, or not conceptual, but a layout drawing of our plans that we actually have a floodplain development permit approved for the development of the access road, parking, pavement maintenance, and the drainage improvements that I mentioned earlier. When our board approved those funds for that project in April this year, they later came back with some concerns just over the recent development that was proposed at the airport. So it's an ongoing discussion that our own board is having. But again, this is why we're here today asking for the county to help protect the airport, because $1.5 million from the state is a lot of money. We want to continue and invest in the airport. We don't want to see the airport get into disrepair or anything like that. We don't want the community to lose that vital connection to the national airspace system. We are hoping for some commitment from the county to help protect the airport from further obstructions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Questions
Uh,
about that?
I don't.
Okay.
You have more to present?
That was my presentation. I also should let Brandon Pike introduce himself.
Excuse me, sorry, I should have brought water. Yeah, Brandon Pike, the aviation plan. Oh, perfect. All right. I'll quench my thirst after. Yeah, I'm the aviation planner, the land use planner for the department. And yeah, commissioners, thanks for having us out here. It's always good to connect on these things because they are, you know, complicated, multifaceted sets of issues. Yeah, I mean, I guess I think maybe Sarah and us, you know, we need to continue having more conversations about, like you mentioned, the declaration of emergency, which is, yeah, I mean, something we can look into and have some more talks with, you know, our upper management of the department. But I mean, I think our concern is from a, you know, kind of brief, you know, review of the county's code is that there are at least some aspects of the code that don't meet the state level requirements of the airport planning rule, which is one of the packets that we passed out today, the thing that says Land Conservation and Development Department, Chapter 660, Division 13 of the state's administrative rules. A couple of examples that come up kind of consistently with this airport.
Yeah, we have that.
is one, there's a discrepancy between what your code lists as the width of the primary surface, which I think is 200 feet. Whereas the state and federal standard is 250 feet. So that leads to some discrepancies, like the home that Tony just mentioned, being built so close to the primary surface, where from the county's code perspective, it seems it's, you know, a slam dunk in terms of staying out of the primary surface. But from our perspective, it's so close, and we haven't seen like a surveyed marker that gives us enough confidence to say with certainty that it's actually, you know, going to be built outside of the primary surface. So something being built inside the primary surface that's not an aviation use, like a light or a portion of a runway, that's a major concern from our perspective. So that's one of the discrepancies. And then one of the others is that state law prohibits new residential development as well as public assembly facilities, which includes like, you know, like shopping centers and have educational uses, places of worship, business, entertainment, amusement. It prohibits all of those uses as well as new residential uses, the state law says, from within the runway protection zone. And those are 2 zones, one at each end of the runway. We passed out.
It's shown in the
Shown on either of your 11 by 17 sheets that we passed out. There's the airport layout drawing, this one here, or this, plan prepared by our contractor. But this, in both cases, the orange or the red trapezoids at either end of the runway. Those are areas where we've seen some development proposals over the years. And I think our hope would be eventually to get the county's code in alignment with what we believe the state law requires. So it's tricky in cases like this where there's been this, you know, encroachment of development that we're just in a position that none of us necessarily created, but we have to figure out how to move forward.
Thank you, Brandon. And so just kind of to translate for non-planners in the room, 'cause
Yeah.
that's what you and I are, you
Right.
know, Dan maybe a little bit, but basically there is an alignment. So we have the same zones, we have the same surfaces, but the distances, there's a difference between the distances that have been adopted and acknowledged in our local land use program versus what has happened with state law over time. Which is why I think just going back to that question about a declaration, right? Because I'm wondering how the county would move forward if the periodic review piece is not applicable, if DLCD or LCDC has not provided the county with notice that we must update our airport overlay zone. And if that declaration has not been made from ODAV, I guess maybe what would be helpful to understand is if ODAV is, without all of those things, just asking the county to voluntarily consider amending land use ordinances. So I think it would be helpful to understand if that is really what your ask is today.
Well, I don't know if we're able to answer that.
Yeah, we'll have to answer that question later.
Sarah, I have a question regarding something you just said. Versus, so the time that the county land use was adopted, what was the state's stance then?
We complied.
We complied, and then the
Right.
state changed theirs.
Correct. And I think the other big piece of this, going back to whether or not this is a ask versus a shall, is also because an update is important, not because it's an airport, but because it's a public airport with public funding, right? I think in the conversation we had a year ago, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if this was a privately operated airport or privately owned, we would not be having this conversation today. Am I right on that?
If it was privately owned and private use only, yes. But if it's public use, period, then these standards apply.
What does that mean? If I have a private airport, but I don't care who lands there, how does that make it not private?
Well, you'd be opening it up to the public, right? You'd let people land and take off without prior permission. Then that would be a public use.
There are federal regulations for airports that apply to public use airports.
Right.
And we have a handful of privately owned and public use airports in Oregon.
So, and I know that, I'm sure, I have lots of concerns and questions, but one of the things, I just want to make this clear, I feel like, and I'm new to this too, relatively new to this issue, but everybody wants the airport. Nobody wants to assume the risk of liability. That's what I feel like. That's because that's what it comes down to is I appreciate Director Absher wanting to get you guys to put it in writing because ultimately we are at a huge multi-million-dollar risk of takings if we just do this. And so the state has to be aware because the county, this isn't our airport, it's your airport. And we followed the rules. This reminds me of another litigation thing we had happen recently where we were following the rules that the state outlined and then we got caught up in it and it cost us $1 million. And so this is very concerning to me because we had the friends of the airport come in and say that there is no liability. The state's claiming there's liability. They're saying it's not, but yet they don't want to run it as a private airport because they don't want the liability. So I'm confused because we're all saying we want the airport, but it's like I'm trying to figure out what that common ground is. And, you know, and I appreciate that we have responsibility to those folks that have already built and that have the right to build based on our local land use. And now I want a safe airport too. So I respect what you're saying. And I'm wondering, like, the safety of the flooding, you haven't fixed it yet. I'm presuming because the board doesn't want to put the 1.5 or $1.3 million into the airport until we see if we're going to comply. Is that fair to say that we're not fixing it, the safety hazards now until we figure out?
No, we've been, and thank you for the question. We've been working toward the project. The board recently had some suggestions of looking at that funding, given the issues at the airport. But we've been taking steps to work toward that project, which we're planning to construct next year.
Okay. Was there some talk at that board also about just closing the airport, selling it?
Not in the last 11 years.
Okay. So that's really what it comes down to me. And I would welcome both of you if you have any concern, but I just trying to get my hands around this it feels like we all want the airport in some capacity, but I don't feel comfortable putting us on the hook for all the liability because the state changed its rules without us giving us some clear direction on how to do that. So that's my concern here. I would love to find a path forward. You know, I don't know if there's a designation for, like, this is a high risk airport. Use at your own risk, like we do with trails, and the state park system has to deal with that, where not every trail is ADA compliant. Some of them are rustic or dangerous and they post it. I don't know if there's some designation like that because I do drag racing on old airports in British Columbia and they are not safe. But airplanes are landing on it and they're public and it's scary. This is literally a cliff. So I'm just wondering, like, is that an opportunity where there's a compromise where we're saying this is a very dangerous, and if you build this house, you have a risk of a plane. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what is the path forward so that the airport's there for the reasons that we state, but there's an inherent greater risk because there is a tendency to make everything so safe. And then what happens here, we lose the only commercial zone we have in PC. We have a huge risk of takings that I'm sure that these two gentlemen are going to tell me how big it is. So those are my concerns, and I don't want to take too much time talking about, but if either one of you would like to.
No, and I share those concerns. I mean, I think we're sitting in a quagmire here. There's no good answer going forward. If you get everything you want, we're $46 million in the hole based on what's currently built around the airport that would either need to buy out vacant properties or not. The people who are already there, should they lose it and their inability to build, that's on us, $46 million. So your 1.5 sounds lovely. Let's fix the airport. 46 million. I just feel like, right? So if you get everything you want, we're 46 million in the hole. If if we get everything we want, you all are looking at, you can't operate an airport. I mean, neither one of those works, right? So I don't see the answer in this room with what's on the table. I don't mean to be rude, but what's frustrating is maybe you guys aren't the people that need to be in the room with us, because when the answer is, well, we can't answer that, we have to go back and ask. We're the decision makers trying to find an answer. And part of what I feel like drags this out is that we don't have a decision maker in your seat for us to be able to say, can we actually start working our way forward in a creative and unique way? Because that's the only thing I see that's going to get us from being in this room every year, henceforth, having the same conversation and having everybody say, well, I can't let you do that. Well, we can't let you do that. Is there any flexibility? Is there any fluidity and any creativity that can be used? So I really appreciate that you all don't have the authority to do that. You've made that clear in the last conversation again here today. Who does? Is it your board? Is there an executive? Like, how does that happen if we want to try to find a creative answer? So forgive me if I'm super direct. It's just kind of my unfortunate way of being.
No, thank you for your comments, Commissioner Scar. We are the people with the authority to make decisions. We have not discussed, or I don't remember prior discussions over trying to find that kind of happy medium. That's definitely something that we're happy to go back and look at and then come back to you with better answers. But unfortunately, we don't have the answers for you today.
Perfect.
But we will come back with those answers.
Because the emails I've exchanged with one of you, you're like, here's our rules. Okay, there's our rules. They don't comply. So how do we do that creative work,
And
right?
we're happy to find, if there's a middle ground we can work toward, we're absolutely happy to
Okay,
find that.
because I think that's what I would really like to see. I would like to see us try to do some form of interest-based negotiation where we're able to say, this is what's really important to the state and ODAV and how this works. This is what's important to the county. This is what's important to the Friends of Pacific City Airport, right? We have 3 very significant stakeholders in this. No one group's rules are going to work. We know that. So how do we do this part? What does it take? Is it work sessions? Is it, because if it's, are you going to go back and make a plan and come tell us, and then we're going to have to take it and go back? How do we do this more fluid than that? Because this, again, it feels like we're going to be at this for a very long time if we can't just sit down and kind of work on it together.
Or if everybody says that this is what I want want anything else, we're gonna end up with nothing. All of us are gonna lose.
I'll end up with nothing, right?
And that's, none of us want that. So I appreciate that you are expressing the interest to kind of, I hate to say think outside the box, but we, in Tillamook County, as you've seen in the earlier presentation, we like to do things really creative and collaboratively here. We don't like being heavy-handed, and we like to get to yes. We like everybody to get to yes. We like to work together to find a solution. I mean, I look at some of these tall houses and like, why are you building that right next to an airport? So I sense the frustration, the safety concern, but I would welcome some opportunity to engage further with this.
As would I. I appreciate my fellow commissioners' comments, and I appreciate you being here and bringing the topic to us again. And, I feel like we're trying to thread the needle here with multiple purposes, but there are many things shared in the room. I think it's entirely shared that everybody cares about the airport. I think it's entirely shared that everybody cares about safety. And I don't know if it's entirely shared, but it's probably shared among us that we care about private property rights. So we have to figure out how to navigate that. It seems to me like, based on things Sarah has said, that the state would like us to just voluntarily change our ordinances, which is problematic for us. If we just voluntarily change our ordinances, then those folks who already own property, to your point earlier, those folks who already own property with an expectation of what they can do there will say, you didn't have to change them, but you did. So that's not going to work for us. But if there are situations in which the state tells us we have to change something, and then we change it. So that's just me thinking out loud. if there's any wiggle room here at all to figure out, you know, what are your non-negotiables, you know, and what are ours? I don't know what they are, but do we have some? You know, if there's any wiggle room here, then let's do that.
Let's keep at it with maybe
Yeah.
through another lens.
If I may jump in for a second, I mean, I think we probably need to do a little bit of research into the date of the adoption of the imaginary surfaces or the Part 77 surfaces in our state code. My understanding was that was adopted in the 80s, so I'm kind of surprised to hear that it wasn't caught during a periodic review. Did you say in the late 90s?
Late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah. Yeah. No,
So,
it was approved by
yeah, and
DLCD.
I mean, I don't want to throw DLCD under the bus. My
They're not in the room.
Today.
Oh, wait, I sit on LCDC now, so we're kind of in the room.
So I mean, this was 25
Correct.
plus years ago.
But here we are,
You're right.
right? So we know that we're sitting here, and I was just writing down all the regulatory agencies that I think I've heard rattled off, all of whom have rules around this, right? DLCD and ODAV and FAA and keep going, right? So here we are, and all of those rules are there. And none of them trump one another that we can figure out how without an exceptionally negative outcome to somebody somewhere else. So there doesn't seem to be a set of rules that we can pick that says, aha, here's the answer. Because if ODAVs trumped the state's land use, we'd be able to say, well, we're having to do this because the state said so, per Sarah's point, which provides us with the cover that we need to not be liable for $46 million as we go to change these things, right? But that doesn't seem to be where this lands. It's like, well, there's this one and there's this one, and they're here. So how do we thread the needle going forward? That's the question. Because if it was missed by somebody way before all of us, and yet here we are. We
Right,
have inherited it.
right.
So what happens with that?
Well, thank you, and we look forward to finding those common grounds where we can. I think we do have shared interest in, you know, protecting the airport and the community. That's our long-term goal is we want to, you know, make the community and the airport safe, and preserve both. I have said before too, it is a local decision. You know, what we both recognize can't do is inaction. If the airport continues to be encroached, as I presented earlier, that is the number one way to ensure inevitably that the airport will, you know, one straw will finally be the one that breaks the camel's back, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
And I hear local decision, and I appreciate that, but it's really not.
No.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit with you, because I think that's what I've heard before. That's what I heard in the emails as we exchanged emails on the property to be developed, is it's a local decision. And it feels as if what you've done is thrown that back on our lap to say you decide whether you want to do the takings or whether you want to close the airport for Pacific City, because from our perspective, it's a local decision.
That's how I
That
feel.
doesn't feel like we're working together to try to thread a needle, or that we're working together to try to find something that works. And if that is truly where you are and you all can't work with us, then that's a different conversation, and one that we need to know that is the different conversation, that you all have found your you know, barriers on this or your sideboards. And as far as you're concerned, we have to act, or it's, because that's what I hear. I don't know if that's what you meant.
I heard
That's
that
what I
too.
heard.
Can I clarify? I feel like if we have an existing permit that's out, that people want a permit, they want to build, they legally can build now by our rules. You're saying, I'll close the airport down if I do that. That doesn't seem like a choice. Basically, we have to choose between a taking, and that taking will trigger other takings. If you closing the airport, it takes away the risk of the taking, but it takes away the airport from the community. And that's bothersome, but that's not our choice. That's your choice. If you choose to close the airport because we choose to follow our existing rules,
State approved land use system.
prior to us figuring out that, I feel like it's unfair for you to say, if you do one more encroachment, we're going to close it down. Well, then that's, like she said, I feel like that's a line in the sand. You just pushed us up against the wall. And now you're saying, if we do this one thing, you're going to close it down. Well, that's your choice. And then that's going to be on your shoulders with the public, because we are trying to figure out a compromise.
Right. So thank you. And if I may clarify really quickly, you know, we absolutely will come back and look at any notices if there's anything that the state needs to provide to the county on anything that may be required to update. But land use planning is a local process. And so what I mean by that is, again, if we can find common ground, if there's something that we can work together on and meet in the middle, we're happy to do that. The community, you know, the state operates 28 airports all over the state of Oregon. And the community, at each one of them, we really look toward community input on what the best interest to meet those community goals and interests are. So that's what we're looking for from the county. And you know, what is the county going to value? What best serves this community? And if we can't meet the common ground, then that's just where there will, I think, be some local impact there. But I'm not trying to draw just a line in the sand, and threatening to close the airport is not what I'm here to do today. It's not something that I'm trying to make that assertion, but history shows us that that's the path that those tend to go down. And that's what we're trying to avoid by working with you.
Is there, just a quick question on a side note, is there a requirement, do you guys have a requirement for how far airports have to be apart from each other for emergency or safety landings? And what is that? And if this airport closes, is that still satisfied? Are you guys within compliance of your own?
So not a strict requirement of distance, but we do have an Oregon Aviation Plan that looks at all of the public use airports in the state. And then there's some federal requirements for which airports are eligible for federal funding, which Pacific City is not.
And I don't want to go in the weeds here. We should be probably cutting this off, but we had this discussion. If it's a private airport, not for public use, not open for public use, but I have a QR code that I can click on their website and join and be a member of their airport. Can I land there? Is it still private?
We have,
Kind of like Thousand Trails or a membership too?
yeah, for a private airport, you can just contact the airport owner directly and get their permission. Yep.
Thank you. All right.
I think the last question I have is FAA approved this development and you don't approve this development. Can you tell me where that crossover happens? Because it's confusing to me.
Yeah. This no hazard determination just came in yesterday morning. And so it's very recent. And I had a conversation with Kenneth Patterson with the FAA who issued the determination. And there were a couple of factors there. One, we included in the packet some materials, this image with the green overlay around the runway. This is showing what was submitted to the FAA. There were 4 latitude, longitude points for the structure. And, you know, we don't have all of the points here, but this was an approximately 25-foot wide or 25-foot long structure, 168 feet away from the runway. This is what was submitted by the applicant to the FAA, so they review what is given to them. This does not line up with the 45-foot structure that was sent to us, the plans that were sent to us by the county and the applicant, that is 125 feet away from the runway. So it was quite a bit farther away from the runway, and shorter, a smaller structure than what's we believe is actually being proposed. So our recommendation is that they should resubmit the 7460, the airspace case, to the FAA with the actual dimensions of the building they're planning to build.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you.
If I can add to that, speaking with the FAA, the no hazard determination, even though this same structure is penetrating the transitional surface to the airport, so it is in navigable use airspace, they deemed it not a hazard due to the significant other hazards immediately adjacent to the southeast, because they are much closer and bigger, closer to the runway. So that doesn't mean that this structure, even though it received a no hazard determination, doesn't mean that it does not have an adverse effect. They still deemed it
obstruction.
They still deemed it to have an adverse effect. It just was not deemed an extreme adverse effect due to the other extreme obstructions immediately adjacent to it.
Good. All right. Well, thank you all. appreciate you coming in and we look forward to the future conversations on this.
Thanks for coming in person.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so
In
much.
person's always good.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
We'll continue the conversation actually right now.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Thank you all so much. All right. Break time?
Break time.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Is that enough?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll check back here at 3:20.
3:20 is.
We're going. Welcome back. We're starting the meeting at 3:22. We're 2 minutes late. It's Deborah's fault.
Is it me?
Please go ahead. And so this is going to be a financial plan kind of update with Tiberius.
Correct. Yep. So this is the next step, following off of the opportunities analysis, the financial assessment. This is the plan that is intended to wrap all of this together and solve our financial woes. Right?
Oh, sure.
So we have this budgeted this fiscal year to complete. Deborah and I continue to work with Nick with his team at Tiberius on this, and he has a scope of work to present to you with if meet your approval that or support. We would bring a contract to you as soon as August 12th is when they're convening. So, Nick.
Hi there. Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you for having me here today. Always a pleasure to work with the county and the county staff, which have been excellent working through these financial issues and working towards a solid financial future. I will share my screen now if I can here. Entire screen. Let's see if this works. Okay, are folks able to see that presentation?
Yes.
All right. Now, fortunately today, this is probably the shortest presentation you will see from me out of the many times I've been there. We only have a couple of slides, just really going over what is in the finance plan that we're proposing to prepare. And this scope of work is something we've coordinated closely with county staff on. So the finance plan, you know, if we look at the report sections here, financial goals, planned actions, a timeline, financial forecast, every one of these items is something that every government entity does to some extent. What we're doing here in a financial plan is doing it intentionally, documenting it specifically, making sure that it's clear and measurable, and really documenting what are the expected outcomes and impacts of these changes. So this is pulling everything together into one document that can be actionable and showing how these actions are going to have positive impacts on the county's cash flow moving forward. This is going to be a mix of pulling together some previously completed information, but also a significant amount of brand new analysis. For virtually all of the sections of the report here, my Tiberius team will be producing the material, but we'll be doing it in close coordination with key county staff, your chief administrative officer, your chief financial officer. We will be meeting throughout the project to collaborate on these elements. When each element is drafted, that information will be shared with the county's executive team, leadership team, and we'll come back to the Board of Commissioners for you to weigh in on. This is not something where we're creating this all and bringing it to you with a bow on it 6 months from now, but your input will be needed to make sure that the strategies and actions that we are analyzing in this plan are the ones that you want to move forward with. So we're really looking for your direction, and then this is how we show how we will implement that direction. In terms of the content here, financial goals, those might seem self-evident, but they are not. So the county to date does not have any clear set of official county financial goals, though there are plenty of documents that have been prepared in the past that kind of hint at where the county would like to go. So we'll clarify a set of goals that will be the guiding factors for the rest of this work. The background information is not intended to be a significant amount of analysis. It's really pulling together existing materials, information on economic and demographic factors, personnel and workforce data, your capital facility needs, debt management data, pulling all that information in here to provide context for the remainder and the meat of the analysis. The planned actions. Here is where we go back to the list that you all have been working on for the last couple of years now, identifying the revenue enhancements and expenditure reductions that are of greatest interest to the county. So we know that that list has been evolving over the last several months and years. Additionally, we identified in previous work some areas where financial policy will be helpful and policy changes might be in order. And here's where we will document those strategies that we want to move forward with, and then really break them down into what are the specific actions that are needed to implement each of those overarching goals. So it's one thing to say that we want to implement a new fee or a new tax of some kind, but what are the 10 steps that it takes to get from here to there to make it a reality? Who needs to be involved in each of those steps? How long will each of those steps take? I do think it's important to note that the list of actions that we'll be including in this document, we will need to finalize that list in the near future. That's going to be finalized for the purpose of this document. In reality, that's going to be an ever-evolving list of actions that the county is interested in pursuing. So just because we finalize a list for our purposes in the next month or two doesn't mean that you can't have a new great idea on how to generate additional revenue or reduce costs 5-6 months from now. But we just need to have a starting point for all of our analysis moving forward. That list of specific actions to implement the desired revenue enhancements and expenditure reductions will then feed into a timeline. So looking realistically at staff capacity and prioritizing which of these actions are of the greatest importance will then show how over the next 5 years the county can make progress on implementing each of these things. Again, focusing realistic staff capacity. I do work for dozens of other public agencies across the Northwest, and staff capacity is a serious limiting factor to accomplish all of the goals that these entities have. So making sure that we are being realistic and strategic about how we can implement each of these actions. That then, I'd say maybe the most interesting piece of this work is how each of those actions on that timeline then impacts the financial forecast. The next slide will get into this in greater detail, but what we want to see in this document is not just what changes the county will be making, but how each of those changes will be impacting the bottom line financially. And to be able to show once this package of improvements and changes have been put into effect, here is our baseline financial forecast, and here's how we expect it to shift as a result of these changes. The last section of this document is all about implementation, answering questions like how will the county track progress on this plan? How will the plan stay up to date in the future? How will different departments and different staff positions there actually use this financial plan in a meaningful way? So we will cover those sort of logistical details there in that final chapter. In terms of getting back to, again, that perhaps the most interesting component of the plan, the financial analysis, this slide is a reminder of the results that we shared several months ago from our financial forecasts, that baseline showing the annual deficit that's projected for the county general fund. We will do a new updated baseline at the start of this analysis. So the county has wrapped up fiscal year ending 2026. So we can add that one more year of financial data to our analysis and adjust our projections accordingly. The county's also already implemented some, I think, enhanced revenues and cost-cutting measures, and so those will be addressed as well. Hopefully that shows that the baseline itself is actually a little bit more positive than the version that we shared several months ago. But once we have that updated baseline, we'll then make sure that we are looking at each of the numerous policy changes, revenue enhancements, expenditure reductions, and working with county staff to identify how each of those are expected to change individual revenues and expenditures in the county budget. And then collectively, what that will do to the overall projected ending fund balance here. This is showing the bottom line. This is showing the total fund balance in this particular slide, but the intent here is to be able to provide more granular information from that as well, to be able to say once, you know, this particular action is implemented, it doesn't just increase the overall funding by X amount, but that funding is tied to a specific purpose, specific projects or programs that we anticipate to be able to be funded as a result of the changes that will be implemented here. So that, in a nutshell, is the phase of work that we are proposing to get underway, and my team's ready to get underway anytime now. We do think it's roughly a 6-month timeline to be able to complete the work. So from the time we get going, it would likely be somewhere right around the end of this year, very beginning of next calendar year, that we'd have this all wrapped up. Though again, I expect that you would be hearing, maybe not from me, but from the county staff that we're collaborating with along the way, as there are key decision points and things that the board would need to weigh in on. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions or discussion on this.
Wow, that was short. I appreciate
Welcome.
I appreciate being given permission to continue to come up with crazy ideas to create revenue. I wrote that down. I made a paraphrase.
We have some of them on the list.
I know you did. Commissioner Scar, you have anything for?
No, I'm ready
Okay.
and excited to have, to get it started. I feel like this is for you all know, the piece I've been waiting for, right? That we've given ourselves more runway, and then we're gonna have an actual plan that has steps that we take, and we can add new things as we go for sure. But I guess my one question might be in the financial goals. You know, we have them kind of, as you said, they're floating in the ether, but we haven't sat down and said specifically, this is what they are. Is that something you will be doing with us? Is that something you'll be presenting to us out of what you've gleaned from the many conversations we've had? But how do those get formed?
Yeah, so I think that would be similar to sort of the reserve fund policy language that we came up with several months ago, where none of it is earth-shattering, but it's just getting it all on paper based on kind of again, what you already are kind of working under and floating in the ether there. Once we get it on paper, there's going to be some details that folks aren't going to agree on, and we're going to need a massage. And so I do expect that will be something early on where we will be seeking board input on it. We're not going to be dictating goals to the board. We will probably do the first pass at what we think those goals are and what's appropriate. But ultimately, as the policymakers and decision makers, we will be looking to you to tell us that we've got the right goals so that we can have that flow through all the rest of this work.
Okay, seems like that's definitely a key beginning piece. Based on other projects we're doing as well, where the goals just we've got to agree, and you're right, that's often where we have different perspectives, whether it's where I think we're all trying to go the same place, but how we get there and when we get there and who goes with us, and all of those pieces that we have to take some time teasing out.
I agree with the scope of work. Thank you, Nick. I look forward to it.
Okay. Great.
All right.
Thank you, next.
Thank you.
Deborah,
Barbara, anything?
get off the quiet.
I am super excited for this project to get underway. I think we have a lot of things up in the air we've been working on for several years now. They all are interrelated, and to map it out, get some timing in there and a clear path will be huge.
That's good to me.
Good.
Okay.
Oh.
What?
Just tell her to stay up here.
Oh, stay up here. Okay. Thank you, Nick. Oh, he's gone. All right. Moving on. Also Rachel carrying this employee compensation policy.
All right.
We have Mackenzie and Deborah sitting in the hot seat.
Be back up.
I see that.
All right, so employee compensation policy. So following the implementation of the countywide job classification study and compensation and pay equity study earlier this year, The county has fundamentally modernized its compensation system, establishing legally compliant, equitable, and market-based compensation practices. This monumental effort created a new framework for classifying positions and administering employee pay across the organization. As we transition from implementation to ongoing maintenance of the new compensation system, it is essential to formally memorialize these new practices through policy. In addition, this effort also provides an opportunity to codify longstanding compensation and classification practices that have historically been administered but were never formally adopted by the board. This will ensure consistency, transparency, and clear governance going forward. So before you today is the draft policy that we'll discuss. It's been reviewed by Troop, HR, our labor attorney, and the executive team. And I've briefed you individually on it a few weeks ago, and it was shared last week, the policy and the supporting information with leadership team last week. I'm planning on bouncing a little bit between the policy and the supporting documentation, and I do think, unless you disagree, it's going to be valuable to go in depth into a lot of the language in here. It's a new policy and it addresses a really important issue. So I'm glad we still have some time left in the briefing. Okay, so I'll skip over a few sections, and if I get going too fast in any of the one sections, please just stop me. I don't want to wait to the end and go back. So we'll go through this collaboratively. Okay, so starting with the policy itself, the purpose is to establish a fair and equitable, competitive, and fiscally responsible compensation system for the employees of Tillamook County. The county is committed to attracting and retaining qualified employees, maintaining internal pay equity, ensuring compliance with applicable federal and Oregon laws, and providing transparency and consistency in compensation administration. To be clear, pay adjustments, overtime, comp time, differential pay, promotions, transfers, reclassifications, and benefits are governed by applicable provisions in the county employee manual and or any applicable collective bargaining agreement. So while this is the compensation policy, it doesn't cover everything to do with compensation because there's other compensation provided in other documents and we didn't want to be duplicative here. This policy applies to all regular full-time and part-time county employees unless superseded by collective bargaining agreements, elected official compensation statutes, and applicable state or federal law. This policy is adopted pursuant to applicable Oregon law, including but not limited to Oregon Public Employment Laws, Oregon Wage and Hour Laws, Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, and Oregon Equal Pay Act. Okay, on page 2, I'm going to skip administration and general policy. It's some generic terms, but I can go through those if you'd like. Under compensation structure, compensation philosophy, prior to implementing any compensation study, the board shall adopt by order a compensation philosophy that includes definitions of total compensation and the comparator entities to be used for compensation analysis purposes. So I think it's important to revisit this because it could change, and I think we did a really good job of revisiting that and the board adopting an order with this last study we did with Troop. So you've done that for the first time, and I think it worked well, but important to revisit for future studies. Classification plan, again, we've always done this, but we haven't documented it per se. The county shall maintain a classification system that identifies essential job functions, assigns positions to salary grades, and reflects relative responsibility and qualifications. Under pay tables and studies, the Board of Commissioners shall adopt pay tables consisting of, at minimum, pay ranges and pay steps. You've done that as long as I can remember. And Human Resources shall recommend that the Board of Commissioners authorize a compensation comparator study conducted in accordance with the county's adopted compensation philosophy and performed by a qualified third-party provider. Compensation studies should be conducted periodically, consistent with industry best practices, and generally every 2 years. And number 3, under this section, Human Resources shall recommend the Board of Commissioners authorize a pay equity study, which is different than the compensation study, conducted by a qualified third-party provider every 3 years to identify potential pay equities. And that's a much smaller project.
I was going to say the same thing with the compensation study, correct? It's not every position would go out to market for every comp study. When we say do it every 2 years, that was a big project. Other places that I'm a part of, they take a statistical slice and check them. Can you say a little bit more about what we mean when we say every 2 years compensation study?
So we did not do an analysis for every job on this study because that isn't typically what you do. So even on the study we just did, I think it was 62 or 63% of all jobs. And then the analysis and the art of that fills in the rest of it. So I would expect probably a max of 62% since we've already done it. Maybe we could do less. I didn't talk to Troop about what percent of our jobs, if that would change or not in future studies. But regardless, it's not every job.
Because I bring it up because every 2 years is great and it's perfect and I love it. And we can't afford to do what we did every 2 years. So just making sure that as we're putting this into policy, because we're not putting into policy, you know, how we do it, that's
Yeah.
going to be,
Yep.
but that there is, at least for the three of us, the understanding that it's likely to be a smaller slice of the pie, probably. Like
Assume a sampling of
a
the.
sampling. Or like senior disability services chooses, I think it's 4 positions every bargaining contract or something. So I guess I do want us to think a little bit about what that does look like. And again, make sure we're all in agreement when we commit to every 2 years, what we're exactly committing to.
And I think I hear you and I agree. And I think that would be maybe in your compensation philosophy of that year is you set the sideboards for, we can only do 50% or 30%, or you know, maybe there's been a huge shift in law enforcement and that's where you're seeking more of the comparables. I don't know, but definitely I think there's room to work with that.
Okay, and similarly with the pay equity, I assume there's gonna, again, we did a very significant group this time.
So the estimated cost for that is only $16,000 every 3 years. And I think that's a legal one you would want to keep up on.
Okay, happy to hear it's only 16,000.
Yeah.
You know, just
I can
reflecting
tell by
back.
your tone, you're expecting it to be much larger.
Yeah, reflecting back on the whole body of work that we did, it's like we, you know, I don't want to set an expectation. Oh yeah, we're gonna do that every 2 years and
Yeah, and it just says HR shall recommend, meaning it has to be someone's trigger to bring it to you.
Yes.
You could decide not to do it for 5 years. You know, and there could be legitimate reasons for why, but this just puts a practice in place and gives you discretion.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to determining base compensation. So I'm not going to go into all the details of the Equal Pay Act. That information is contained partly in the supplemental information and the legal memo provided by the labor attorney. But as it relates to compensation salaries, think of it in 2 parts. We have work of comparable character, which is the job and where that job is in our structure and pay tables. And then the bona fide factors relates to the person. So 2 distinct analyses and processes that ultimately determine someone's wage. So the Oregon Equal Pay Act is a 2017 law requiring employers to provide equal pay and benefits to employees performing work of comparable character, regardless of protected class status, including race, color, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, marital status, veteran status, disability, or age. So when we talk about work of comparable character, that is the job. In accordance with the law, the county prohibits salary history inquiries and compensation differences based on protected classes. Compensation differences for employees performing work of comparable character may only be based on one or more of the following bona fide factors. So this is where the pay calculator comes in. Certain factors will determine where someone gets placed on the pay table based on bona fide factors, which are in the Equal Pay Act. So the list in front of you, the bulleted list are all of the factors that are in law. So which ones pertain to Tillamook County and which ones are in our calculator. We don't provide compensation based on merit or quality and quantity of production. Workplace location and travel requirements can affect the wage, but that is baked into the job. So that's the work of comparable character. So what goes in the pay calculator are seniority, education, training, and experience. And this is where we have the flexibility based on the qualifications that employees have on their submissions.
We do have quantity of production in our health providers. So I don't know if how that.
That is, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, that is correct, but that is not part of the pay calculator. That is a separate, that is separately provided on the pay table through a different means of analysis.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a good point.
I think that's.
And that has not gone away.
One of the uniquenesses.
Yeah.
Of which the health clinic has any number of them, but that's one of them.
Yes, yes. Okay, as I was preparing for this, I realized the flow of the next two sections might be better reversed. So I'm gonna jump from B to C. And I'll shift that when the policy is updated, but under steps to apply equity, this again talks about the first step in applying equity is the work of comparable character. So what job are they in? And then justifying the wage differences based on the bona fide factors is the step 2. And then there's some other items there that are in the pay equity, but don't necessarily go into the pay calculator, but it's there for context. Okay, so jumping back to what's written as B, pay equity factors and weighting to determine work of comparable character. So again, focusing on the job and where the job is in our structure. The county utilized, and this was a big part of the troop analysis. The county utilized Troop's HR 19 factor methodology, which is outlined below, organized within 5 categories to evaluate and determine work of a comparable character. So this, again, work of comparable character is defined in the law, and Troop developed an analysis to determine how to place jobs. So we have the 5 categories of knowledge, responsibility, effort, working conditions, and skills. And that analysis determined basically the pay tables. The pay equity calculator. The pay equity calculator is a tool solely owned and used by Human Resources to analyze compensation among employees performing a work of comparable character. Again, step 1, that's the job. Step 2, the pay equity calculator uses a systematic application of 4 of the lawful bona fide factors, which are weighted to determine equitable pay table placement for new hires, promotions, and compensation adjustments. The pay calculator criteria are weighted as outlined below. So experience is 60%, education and training are 30%, and seniority is 10%. So ever since this was, the restructuring was implemented in, I think it was finally done at the end of January, every new, any change or new hire, HR has been running the criteria through the pay calculator, and there's been an output of the step placement, and it's all over the range. Some come at the top, some are at the bottom, and it's everywhere in between. Human Resources shall utilize the pay equity calculator to determine employee pay placement within the pay grade assigned to the employee's job. As I was working on this policy, and as there were some new hires being offered positions, there were some questions that came up with directors about negotiating what new employees come in at. And I talked to Cameron a lot about this, and she was surprised that that is still happening, because it sounds like a lot of places it's expected that there's not negotiations occurring. And I know that does still happen, but from what she's seen, because of the pay equity law, it is shifting in part. And the way we recruit, it doesn't say anything about that. We have a range, and if I was applying to a county job, I'm not familiar with the pay. I wouldn't be familiar with the pay equity. I would expect that I could negotiate. And so you come in thinking that there's that expectation. So he looked at, I think Kelly looked at some other counties, and there are other counties that have in their recruitment, a statement about the equity laws. And so we have started posting on our recruitments. Tillamook County follows Oregon pay equity laws and reviewing education, experience, and seniority for wage offers to help set that expectation up front. So that's something that we're already doing. I'm going to stop there before I go on. Questions on work of comparable character or the pay calculator? It really is the meat of compensation. So I want to make sure it's well understood.
I do understand it. I appreciate you talking about advertising that, because I think it is a cultural shift. It's something that's worrisome to me, to have people, in terms of recruitment, to have people assume that they're going to be able to negotiate a starting wage, or at least try. So I think if we're agreeing that we're not even going to entertain discussion about it, somehow we need to advertise that. And maybe what you said is helpful. I don't know if it's clear enough, because it didn't sound to me like putting myself in the mindset of somebody applying. Yeah, I didn't hear, you can't negotiate this. So, maybe it could be clearer, just to not set people up to be disappointed as they're negotiating for a job.
Other questions?
No, I think you guys have done the research, but I am just super curious how it plays out in other places, because it is a very monumental cultural change, not just for us, but for all of Oregon, right? And I realize that pay equity drives this, and that, this was passed in 2017, but we're just now in 2026 getting it locked and loaded and really running in Tillamook County. And I imagine there are other places where that's still not necessarily totally implemented in this same way, but I am curious if job seekers, and I don't know, Mackenzie, in HR, are you seeing that with job seekers that they now just expect to be given one offer?
A lot of people, it's half and half still, I think.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are grateful for what they get, and other people still think that there's room to negotiate. We've only just started putting that on the jobs. I don't know that we've made any offers, maybe one, since that's been put out there. So we're still the trial phase of how that's going to affect.
And you're absolutely right about some people don't know. I mean, up until we did the truth study, we didn't know we couldn't do half the things that we've been doing. And Adam did a really good job of explaining how some Oregon employers are still doing things that maybe they shouldn't be in his memo. So bonuses and other things. So hey, we're ahead of the curve, right?
Oh, Chris Leahy.
Isn't that Chris?
Yeah. Hey, Chris, go ahead. Here, yep. I was going to say.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on that. I do have some issues with the calculator. Partially where it comes down to is directors not really having a lot of opportunity to take a look and review and comment on work of comparable character is. For example, in our particular situation, we do have people that come out of the farming industry, and some of that work is directly applicable. It is comparable character as far as some of that work, but what percentage of working on a farm is comparable to us? There is some comparable there, work of comparable character, but not all of working on a farm is comparable. So where do the directors come in and say, yeah, that's comparable character, but maybe 50% of that work is comparable character, certainly not the entirety of it. The other thing that's kind of getting lost in this too is skill. So we've had situations where somebody will come in and they will do the driving test, or before that they said, hey, I've got 20 years of driving a vehicle. And driving a vehicle, we ran into the fact that no, just because they said they can drive a truck, they can't. So we implemented a number of years back a driving policy and drive test. So even though they said they can drive a truck, they can't. So we implemented a driving test that says, okay, let's see if you can actually drive a truck. We're going to be working through to modifying that driving form so that we can provide, you can get 12 out of 15 points, just simply walking around the vehicle and identifying different things and making sure it's good. Of that form, 5 or 3 points out of 15 engages in your actual driving skills. So you can drive a truck, but you need remedial training. And for MEO2s, one of the primary driving factors of that is it is expected that if you come on board at the MEO2, just because you have a CDL does not make you a good driver. This is where the skills component comes in. So we ran into situations where the skill is they check the box. They've met it. They've got years of experience. We disagree. I have disagreed with the comparable character years of experience. Calculator comes back out and says, this is exactly what it is. We're going to offer step 5. And when we compare that against what I would calculate years of experience is different, is who is making the determination of comparable character. And it does not seem that the directors have a say in that. So we're seeing some things come out of that, I'm looking at these and I'm looking at, our workers, and it says, this person just doesn't have the skill or comparable character to some of the others. So is it fair to somebody that is been here for a while is step 5, and now we're bringing somebody in here that can hardly drive a truck? He's going to need somebody to sit with them for a couple of weeks or more. And then while they say they have that experience, and they do, they don't have the skill. So to me, I have drivers been here, they're step 5. I bring somebody on step 5. I need to do remedial training. And the calculator says step 5 period. There's no negotiation with HR and the directors in order to meet that. So the director's not really having input or the ability to, hey, this is something that we disagree with. Let's talk about comparable character. Right now, the answer to that is whatever the calculator says goes. So I do have some disagreements with the calculator, and maybe it's how we're applying it is thought that's possibly where that is.
Okay.
That's my comment.
Thanks, Chris. I want to give Rachel a-
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I have a different perspective on what's been happening there. HR absolutely does work with the directors. They don't just provide a number and that's it. They do provide the initial number, but what we are trying to build into the system is consistent application of what's going into the calculator. And when we start imparting opinion or assumptions on anything regarding how an employee or candidate may be qualified, I think we run into an area where we don't want to be. So what HR must do is input into the calculator what is needed from interviews as well, interviews and the application. And so I completely hear what Chris is saying. If someone has put something on an application and gone through an interview and it turns out to be different, that's not where we want to be. So, but HR does work with the directors on this, and there has been a lot of back and forth on interpretation of what goes in. There has been disagreement on what goes in, but that has been in collaboration with the director. And yes, at the end of the day, there is some kind of line in the sand of we have to base it on what's on the application. So as a solution, I agree with Chris. I like the idea about the adjusting the driving test, for example. If that is something that is going into a calculator to determine what comes out the other side, and it may be flawed, we should be working on that. But at the end of the day, HR needs to have the tools to do whatever evaluation is needed to input it into the process.
I just want to say, I agree with Chris on that. For example, if I say I can type 100 words a minute and I can only type 20,
right,
and I've got 10 years of typing, it's a different employee.
Totally.
What do you think it has? So I
There needs to be
agree
a better
that
test for that.
however that works out, I agree that if a guy says he's been driving for 20 years and he doesn't know how to bleed the air brakes or doesn't know where something is, that should be.
Exactly. And it's a risk we run, I would say, with any employee who says they can do something. And so we need to.
Are we not allowed to make that a requirement of the?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
If it is such an issue or a concern of basing pay on certain qualification, we should have a process that teases that out on the front end. So what goes in the calculator is more accurate.
Agree.
And I'll give you a perfect example for you. If someone says they're proficient in Excel and they're not proficient in Excel, you want to, that's it.
Out of here.
So I appreciate that. That's what I would be thinking if I were you changing this.
Yeah, so can the tests then be part of the interview process?
Absolutely. And funny, if you want to talk about Excel, for way back when, I actually had an Excel test.
Okay.
Because I wanted people to know Excel. They would oversell their qualifications. So Mary Jo and I had them do an Excel test, and you would be surprised at how many people couldn't do. So I completely agree with updating.
Chris has got his hand up. Chris, is there anything else you want to, without holding us up too much?
Do you have anything else?
You're still muted.
Is that one of the tests?
Next time I'm not, yeah.
That's
So
not
you've been
like-
tested on you've been tested on your computer skills lately.
Apparently not. So one of the things that is, again, we've actually disagreed so much to the point with the calculator is that I refuse to make an offer to somebody. And part of that is the fact that if we make an offer to somebody at the higher level, there's no way to lower their skills or their step. One of the things that would be nice to do is say, okay, calculator and I come up with a disagreement and I've got validity to my statements. And then they're here for 6 months. And at that point, can we increase the step? That way I'm not hiring somebody that is pretty clear to me, again, the driver. We would have to sit, somebody in that vehicle for a couple of weeks just to get the rust off, right? And that might be a great driver, but if that person comes in at step 5, there is no ability to make any adjustments. So having the ability to say, okay, we'll hire you on. You've got some skills, you've got some basic skills. Maybe you've been out of the industry for a while, and let's test you out for a little bit. They can still drive. They meet the minimum requirements for the job. They're just not that good, but maybe they are after they knock the rust off. Not having the ability to do a step increase, not having the ability, nor should I have the ability to lower their step, becomes extremely frustrating. We have the ability to say, let's start at step 2. And then, after a couple of weeks of driving, we can bump you up a step. We've actually done something similar where we hired somebody on, and again, it's only what's in their resume. So we hired them on as an MEO2, and some of the requirements in the resume are in the job description now. Is we put metrics in to be minimum qualification to become an MEO3. The minimum qualification to become an MEO3, they did not have that in the resume. My guys, gals, they're not good at putting resumes together. So I know that at HR, they've gone back to some of the candidates and say, is there anything else that we need to consider when we're doing that? They're just not that good at putting resumes together. And if you're only based off of that, if that's one of your driving factors, we're missing it. And I think having some ability we ended up promoting one person because he had experience that he didn't have in the resume. He was able to justify it, and we were able to get a promotion. Well, I can promote from an MEO2 to an MEO3, provided that they're meeting the minimum qualifications, but I can't do a step increase. And I definitely can't go backwards in steps, which makes a pay equity issue with other people that I have in my department. So, I'm probably going to continue to struggle with this.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the things that you're describing are what has in part caused us to be where we were prior to the troop work. And so we have to just be very careful about adjusting here and adjusting there and not having it based on information on the front end. But again, I completely agree with updating the input, and I can see how your example of some of these candidates aren't putting things that they should be on applications, and there should be specific interview questions about that, or more testing before they're hired, or maybe I don't know, but I think most of this is about process. But we can't just hire people in and then start moving them around. So I just want to be really careful about that, because that's frankly what was happening before in some places, and we had to spend a lot of money unraveling that and adjusting positions.
Right, and so we're going to continue to work to try to figure out some of the failing in the processes. Is defining work of comparable character is something that is, the MEO positions, they do a variety of different things. Some of the farming work is directly applicable. Some of the, you come out of the asphalt industry, it's applicable. There's a lot of different things that are applicable because they do so many different things, but what percentage of that work is comparable character? So I don't need to keep belaboring this. I do have problems, not so much with the policy, but I think that on my end and on HR's end, we can improve our system. I just keep hearing that that's the calculator. To do anything deviation from that, we're not following state law. I believe we are following state law with my interpretation of it, is that we're just not coming to an agreement. And I think that's something that I can work on with modifying some of the questions, modifying the driving test, and I can take we've already started going down that path. But I just simply, there's some people that I'd like to hire. There's no way I can hire them at a higher level than some of the people or at an equivalent level for other people. I understand why it's here. I don't need to keep belaboring that. Thank you for the
Okay.
opportunity to speak about it.
All right, Chris, I think is it fair to say that it's not affect the policy, we can move on? Because I would argue that there's an under experience under one of the bona fide factors, and that some work that can be done there between HR.
Correct. This doesn't say what qualifies for experience.
That's what I mean, so,
Well, that is in the job description, which is work of comparable character, which is why this should be fixed.
perfect. Thank you, Chris. We hear you and value your opinion.
Okay.
Before we move off of that, I'm wondering, because we have Marlene in the room, nice to see you. I'm wondering about the making an offer to a physician or to somebody who's an upper level position. I'm imagining making an offer to a physician or a PA, et cetera, and them and having to tell them or explain to them there's no room for negotiation. This is it. Take it or leave it.
What's the question?
Just that because you've been in the position of interviewing and recruiting medical providers for a long time, I'm having trouble grasping the cultural shift from people feeling like they should be able to negotiate their starting wage or benefits or whatever to going into an interview with a medical provider and making an offer and saying, that's it, take it or leave it. This is the only offer.
Well, I think it's fair to say, as was described, that cultural shift has not occurred. And no one that we have spoken to, at least from the outside recruiter's perspective, I don't know what happens in the county because there's no communication with applicants. But the upfront is, what's your range? I mean, that's what they want to know. What's the full benefits? Some of the things we're going to talk about today. For upfront, what's the vacation and PTO? What are your moving expense that you're covering? Those kind of things. So there is not a culture shift, and having some specific language saying we follow pay equity laws gets you partway there. But to say there's no negotiation, this will be calculated based on a tool that the county uses, we'll see what happens. Will further hamper the ability to recruit for positions. But if that's what the law says, then it'll take a shift, I guess, for people to learn that.
It's my fear.
Same.
Agreed.
Yeah, I don't think any of us feel like it's not a challenge. I think it's a risk decision that we're making that says pay equity says you don't get to negotiate, and here's we are. And sometimes it's hard to be ahead of the curve.
It doesn't feel good.
No, and
you have a great candidate that is a rock star, is a rock star, but on paper is similarly qualified with someone who's been here 10 years. You can't can't put them ahead.
It all works
Yeah.
until the person who's been here 10 years sues you.
Exactly.
And then it doesn't work anymore. And then the culture shift is paid for through the risk you took. And I think that's the hard part, that we as a county have a pretty risk adverse stance generally for things related to legal. No offense, Brian, but that's why you're here, right? And that's, I mean, how I read it as well in the labor law memo was it's a risk choice and some companies are still taking that risk.
I just wanted to add in balancing the risk, there's two sides to it. One is if we potentially get sued for, not following those rules. The other side of it is if we are so risk adverse, we will end up with no workforce at all. And then your risk is you don't have those services. So there's a tipping point to that as well. And then I also wanted to say I appreciate the ability to have input into what Chris was talking about and into what goes into the calculator. And I'd like to, continue to have those conversations when positions come up, which may help and impact some of that.
Can I mention on those factors that go in there real quick? We absolutely have to rely on you directors to help us. HR is not an expert in every single job here, so we wouldn't know what those comparable characters are. So we do rely on the directors for that information. So I've had emails exchanges with Chris about asking what are those comparable characters? How do we formulate that to where it's consistent going forward? So that conversation is happening out there. And from an HR's perspective, we have to do what's legally defensible in court, shall we ever be there. So we are putting on strictly what is on the application, what is on the resume, and what comes out in the interview, because those are documents we can produce in court, not the assumptions that are being made on whether that they did that part-time or seasonally or what have you. So we're strictly using what is provided in those documents for that purpose. So it is legally defensible in court.
Okay.
More work to do on the application.
Yeah, I think that's great. There's an opportunity here to fix it and to improve it.
Okay, we are moving on to number 9, other compensation. This is just clarifying that, again, there's other compensation that employees receive, and those are in other documents in the manual and collective bargaining agreement. So B, this is kind of an interesting one. This came to my attention from the sheriff a couple of months ago. He was part of some communication with the Sheriff's Association regarding an Oregon Government Ethics Commission ruling on pre and post business travel. So I'm going to read this from the supporting information. ORS 244.040 sub 1 prohibits a public official from using or attempting to use their official position or office to obtain a financial gain or avoid a financial detriment for themselves or relatives or household members or any business with which they or their relatives or household members are associated, if the financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment would not otherwise be available but for the public official holding their official position or office. And this is for elected officials and county employees. So this was included in communication from Elmore Dickens, who is the Oregon State Sheriff's Association counsel. And he shared that the Oregon Government Ethics Commission has taken the position that if a public official, employee, or elected goes to an event early or stays later on their own dime, that is an ethics violation because they avoided the cost of paying for their own plane ticket to that location. If the county, have not designated it as part of official compensation, going early or staying late is technically an ethics violation. So the resolution is for the county to declare pre and post travel part of the compensation package, and that there is no actual financial benefit as it costs the county the same amount of money whether the driver flight is a day early or late, thus designating the travel as official compensation. It is not an ethics violation. So this basically says you can go early, you can stay later, we aren't paying for it, and it's not an ethics violation. So that's a timely fix. Yep. Okay, sign-on bonus. Again, referring to the packet. So the county's practice has been, in an effort to retain employees following Dr. Betlinski's retirement at the health department, as a doctor, not medical examiner, I believe, In 2010, the county began providing hiring bonuses to new hired employees new to the county for positions on the health provider pay table. And we've done that for some time. The bonus has been part of a the bonus was part of a negotiated agreement, itemizing a payment and forfeit schedule and service expectation. The county has offered up to $14,500 for new health providers, and the application of the bonus has been inconsistent for new county employees, including 4 of the 17 past new employees receiving no benefits, no bonus at all. HR is not aware of any other county position receiving any type of sign-on bonus. The temporary exemption that allowed employers to ignore pay equity regulations for hiring and retention bonuses, meaning we could do whatever we want, and it didn't have to be equal across the board. That was during the pandemic, and it expired in September of 2022. So the legal opinion is, while nothing under the law specifically prohibits an employer from providing bonuses or extra vacation to employees, providing these benefits to a new employee but not to existing employees in the same or similar position creates a potential liability under the pay equity law. So the legal risk is if the county provides bonuses to only new employees, which is what we've been doing, there's a medium to high risk this practice will invite a pay equity claim. A resolution in that situation may include the employee receiving back pay, attorney's fees, punitive damages. So the recommendation from the executive team out of their June meeting was that the team acknowledged the county's current practice, the uniqueness of health providers, and the difficulty of hiring these professionals into the positions. And the team supports the continued practice of hiring sign-on bonuses to employees hired into the health provider pay table, including existing county employees who advance to a health provider position. Additionally, the team recommended adding a provision to the policy requiring that employees reimburse the county for 50% of any bonus received if the employee leaves within 2 years. And in collaboration with Marlene on what amount this should be, she'd recommended $15,000 in her working with her team. And so a $15,000 sign-on bonus for new and existing employees hired into health provider positions is in the proposed policy, to be provided in 2 equal installments, the first at 6 months, the second at 12 months. And if there's a part-time employee, it would be prorated. And we do have, because of pay equity, there are some employees who have not received this amount, and we have 1 new employee who didn't receive anything. So there will be 5 payouts upon implementation of this policy, which I've already talked to Marlene about.
Okay.
Questions on sign-on bonus?
No, I think that's great. I think it's necessary in this climate, and I appreciate that we clarified to include existing employees as well.
Relocation allowance. During the February board briefing, which is where we first started talking about some of this, HR presented a recommendation supported by the executive team to provide an increased allowance for relocation assistance for newly recruited employees hired into the executive service and health provider positions. The board expressed support for the recommendation, and staff have since increased the allowance outlined in the proposed policy. So what's in the proposed policy is a relocation allowance for up to $5,000 for, should just be 5,000. 5,000 for moves within Oregon and 7,500 for moves outside of Oregon.
Good.
And so that was discussed in February, and then as we were digging into this more, during the June executive team meeting, similar to the sign-on bonus, the team further recommended adding a provision to the policy requiring new employees to reimburse at 50% if they leave within 2 years. Okay.
So is that the idea that they submit their receipts, or is it just a?
I don't remember. Do they need receipts?
We structured it as an allowance, so it would be the amount up front. No, no receipts on payment.
So much easier.
Yeah, because the other term was, there was another term which triggered needing to provide receipts. So this we can just give them a lump sum. Yeah. Thank you, Deborah. Okay, I think the rest is pretty straightforward. So job classification descriptions describes how The creation, maintenance, and revision shall follow standardized process, focused on the essential duties, responsibilities, etc., but not the individual occupying the position. This is about the job and the work of comparable character. Human Resources is charged with maintaining all current job descriptions. And this is really important. Our intent to maintain active and current job descriptions that accurately reflect the work being performed on an ongoing basis rather than countywide periodic reviews. We never want to do a countywide job description review. So this policy is building in how to keep them current.
Sure.
It describes how Human Resources collaborates with the department director on developing the job description using the standard format. Once HR and the department supervisor agree on the job description, it's just approved. It doesn't need to come to the board. It'll be bargained if that is a necessary piece. Section E specifies some triggers that will automatically prompt a review. And I think that is it for the policy. We'll talk about vacation. That is in the manual. But anything else on the policy? The next step is to create the board order and bring it back to you for adoption on the 12th at the earliest.
Okay. Anything?
No, I
Nope. Good. I'm good as well. I really appreciate all the work and I appreciate this a lot. So.
All right.
The executive team too.
Yes, there's been a lot of work behind the scenes by many.
Yeah.
Okay, vacation. So what you just discussed is the employee compensation policy. Vacation is not in that. Vacation benefit is in the employee manual. So if there's any change to the vacation benefit, that would come before you in the form of a board order that modifies the manual.
It's not on my agenda of topics, so I'm sorry you can't.
We can.
Okay, no, let's go ahead.
I'm fine. Okay. Okay, so discussion regarding increased vacation for executive service and health provider employees. During the February board briefing, HR presented recommendations supported by the executive team to maintain current vacation accruals and eliminate the 40 hours of administrative leave for new hires instead front-loading the first year of vacation, which equates to 156 hours, assuming they're coming in at the first tier, which they would be. These recommendations were made by HR and the executive team based on a pay equity issue exists when only new employees receive 40 hours of administrative leave, which effectively equates to an additional week of vacation in that first year. Executive service and health provider employees, as a practical matter, already often reach max accrual limits. Half of the employees on these two pay tables have reached their limit this calendar year, and some have been at their limit for several months. And once that limit is reached, employees forfeit vacation accrual. The county currently offers a generous benefit package, and we're 9% above comparators. There's a potential for morale issues and perceived inequities that may arise from other employees who have longer tenures, meaning if we pull executive service and health provider employees into a higher accrual, you could have employees that have been here less receiving more vacation than employees who've been here 20 years, for example. And a really big one, changing vacation accruals may impact future bargaining negotiations, and Adam speaks to that a little bit in his memo. During the February briefing, the board did not support the recommendations HR and the executive team presented during the briefing. Rather, the board expressed support for the ability to offer more benefits, allowing vacation to be negotiable and not having hard rules, and creating a separate vacation accrual table with higher accruals. I'm not going to cite the legal opinion again, but it's the same as the sign-on bonuses, that there's a potential pay equity issue if you have for different groups. For new employees. So the new employees coming in receiving vacation is an issue. You can have different groups having different vacation accruals. That is permissible by the law. So as we dug into this more during the June executive team meeting and citing the same original justifications, the team affirmed what it had recommended from the February meeting, which was to make no changes to the executive service and health provider vacation accruals and eliminate the 40 hours of administrative leave. Additionally, just some commentary in the meeting, it was noted that increased vacation wouldn't necessarily compel candidates to accept these positions. If a candidate really wants to work for the county, just being loose with the language, if the candidate really wants to work for the county, they will accept the position because they want to be here, not necessarily because of a large vacation benefit. And I did confirm with HR that to their knowledge, for the team that's been here, we have not, to their knowledge, that was shared if a candidate declined an offer, vacation was not why. Not that that didn't happen, but it wasn't conveyed. I'm not accepting because the vacation was low, but it may be the case. So at this time, HR and executive team are not recommending any change to the vacation. However, I understand that the board may still be interested in exploring options. And so if you were interested, what does that look like that is permissible by law? So the table that I shared has two options, and these were just starting points based on what I've heard from at least one commissioner about an idea for a new accrual. And then I added another one. So there's two tier options here. The first one is in the light green, and the first tier is in the dark green, which is 6 weeks. And so the employee would come in upon hire and immediately have 6 weeks of vacation, which is an accrual of 20 hours a month or 30 days a year. And that would be higher than anything else on the pay table. And currently, all of, give or take a year or so, all the accruals for Teamsters, AFSCME, and non-represented and elected and non-represented is about the same. So this would be a deviation from that, where the 6 weeks would be above the employee tier of 20 years or more. So let's see, so that would be, 4 days higher than the current top tier for employees. The team recommends that if there is desire to add these tiers, that because of what I already shared about these employees at a max accrual rate, that you increase the maximum accrual rate to 2 times. Currently, it's 1.5 times the annual accrual rate. And I think these employees are going to need more time to take this time off because there's already issues with that. And it could go up from 2 or not at all, but that's a recommendation. Currently, there's only cash out options once per year. There's a recommendation because we're anticipating there's going to be more payouts needed because there's still going to be an issue with being able to actually take this time off and people are going to hit their limits, to provide for cashing out twice a year in May and October as an option. And just noting that this option will likely increase vacation liability and the number of payouts. And I'll go through the next tier, and then I wanted Deborah to speak to the payout numbers that she has here. So the dark green is 6 weeks. And then because of how high that is, there's no tiers built into it. It's just flat. You get 6 weeks forever. You could add another tier if you'd like. The second option is a light green. And the concept here is coming in at a higher level and building a couple of tiers. So they would come in at the same level that employees are that are the 10 to 14 years. Deborah, you want to speak to the payout numbers you have there?
Yeah, so with the larger pools upfront and the 2 times per year payout, it is likely that our vacation buyout expenses would increase with these 2 different structures. With the dark green option, option A1, whatever you want to call it, I would expect that it would double our current vacation buyout with that immediate upfront accruals and the 2 times payout. Now, that being said, with executive service and health provider, there's 19 employees, or there was in 25-26, 4 opted for buyout. More than 4 were at max. So I would expect it to be double what it currently is, while not everybody eligible would be buying out. So that's what the number 15,000 equates to, is that health provider and executive service double or additional cost for that one. The light green is the tiered system in which accruals are not as high as the dark green. But we still have the 2 times per year option of buyout. I would expect maybe a 50% increase in vacation buyout under that circumstance. The rate at which we'd see maximum accrual limits would be less than that of the dark green option. So that is the vacation presentation.
That is the vacation presentation. So we're looking for the board's direction on what you would like to do around vacation accruals, if you'd like changes or not.
Okay. I will say for me, I would accept the HR and executive team recommendation of making no changes for me. I appreciate the work they did on that.
I'm torn, to be really honest, because I do look at it, and I look at it for myself as an example. At my age, if I were to decide to come from my previous job and be a director at the county and have to come in with that limited amount of vacation, for me, that would have been a stopper, because vacations are important to me and time away and all of that's important to me. So for me personally, I connect very closely, I think, with the people who would be unlikely to make that leap, would just say, gosh, county job sounds really good, but it's not worth that to me. So, you know, I'm torn. I understand what the HR, attorney said about, gosh, then you get yourself into a bargaining position where the whole union's going to want it. And I get that. However, executive service is a different job. My union members are not expected to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, if that's what's needed, without any additional compensation. My executives are, and some of my executives do. And I do feel like there is a different classification there. And that would generally, for our executives, we are asking for people who have experience. Generally, we are trying to draw people who it's not their first job or their second job. These are individuals who have spent a career building the skills that we need to have them run a complicated department. And if we want to get people who will run it well, I do think that that vacation is an important component. Maybe that's just because it is to me. I mean, I can't do what I do if I don't go away every now and then. So, you know, I'm interested in looking at the second accrual piece of it. I think giving them 6 weeks at the beginning, I can understand the complications of that one. I think the accrual is a better option, but I am interested in looking at that potentially.
So am I. Thank you. I have heard from people that it was concerning to them that coming in, people with executive level experience, that it was concerning to them what we have to offer was concerning. And I agree completely that executive level is different than folks who are represented and implies experience, you know, in some cases, a lifetime, a career full of experience. And so I don't think they're, in my mind, it's not reasonable to it's not apples to apples. So, and also I prefer the second option with the lesser payout risk.
Vacation buyout.
These, I didn't know where this was going to go. These were just 2 initial ideas. Do you generally like how green exists in front of you? Are there other options you would like to see? I'm hearing the dark greens off the table.
I didn't.
And we have a consensus to go forward, so I hear you, Paul. Yep.
Yeah, I didn't think of other things.
Okay.
I did not sit down and run the numbers and think of other
Okay.
things. So,
And I think if you back it up 1 tier, it's not maybe enough of a shift, but
right.
so I kind of picked the middle for obvious reasons.
Yeah, no, and I think if you look at that and you say that we're looking for someone who probably has 10 to 15 years of work experience under their belt for these positions, I think it makes sense aligning it where we have. 90 days.
Thoughts on the annual accrual? I just picked two, didn't do any analysis on that, just trying to honor that it should be higher. But we could do more analysis on that. I don't know if that's.
Yeah.
Sorry, I distracted. her.
Okay, I was asking about opinion on so currently the max accrual is 1.5 times.
Yeah.
I just arbitrarily picked two just to demonstrate it should be higher. I don't know if there's an analysis that can be done that identifies a.
I feel like
Okay.
we want them to take vacation, frankly. Not so to the ability to accrue more and the ability to get paid out twice don't actually appeal to me. This is vacation and I want my leaders to take vacation. I don't want it to be just an extra paycheck while they work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So I feel like there is this, that piece of it where having people leave the accrual where it is. I would leave the accrual where it is and I would leave the payout where it is. And really encourage, and as we are looking at training and all the different things that we're doing through HR, wellness, et cetera, that part of what we're encouraging everyone is to take your vacation. It is for rest and renewal. It is not an extra paycheck. Right, Marlene?
I am not on the right.
She took some vacation this last year. It was really exciting. Maybe the second time I've seen her do it. Sarah's gotten better at it. She's still on there. It took her a while. She's gotten better at it. But I think it's important. And I think our structure supporting people taking that is important.
Agree. Okay, so I think the approach is pretty clear. What I didn't put a lot of thought into is how to implement this. So if we implement this on September 1, where are existing employees already going to be at? And we may need to, we'll do some analysis on that because we may have a grace period.
I think we need a
sort of-
runway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can.
Yeah, and I totally get that.
Yeah, we can
There are
figure that out.
only 19, but there are 19 individual different situations, right?
Okay, so we're going with the light green. We're not making a change to max accrual or payout options. And I will work with Deborah and HR on if there needs to be a transition period or the timing of implementing this. And we will bring that back to you by board order at some time in the next few weeks. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Right?
That's Marlene.
Marlene?
I have a question because was waiting. Rachel knows. I was
We'll ask
waiting.
permission. Let me ask that on the record.
Oh,
About
okay.
About the offer?
Yeah.
So Marlene is in negotiations with a candidate and preparing to make an offer. And I asked her to wait until today because I thought it might be advantageous. So we are going to assume that this policy is going to get adopted so she can make the offer, but the offer would state that it wouldn't go into effect until it's actually adopted by the board, but I just wanted to make you aware of that. So.
Good. Everybody send positive vibes out. 'Cause this is one of those where the concern is that we are risk adverse to the effect of hampering ourselves from being able to offer our service. So. Yeah.
But vacation has increased, so that's
Yeah.
a big piece of it.
We'll see. Thank you.
Not
And
quite
the
as far as
sign-on
she was
bonus.
asking for, but.
Vacation and the Santa.
Right, and then you've got the moving bonus, so when you put all that together, you hope a big check.
Yes, and that all that stuff was tentatively described with the recruiter already, saying, in February that it's in process. It'll take a while, knowing the candidate's going to have to give 90 to 120 days notice because they're in a similar role. We'll see how it goes.
Okay, fingers crossed, positive energy.
All right. Good?
Yeah.
All good? Nothing
A
else?
lot of good work. Thank you.
All right.
Lots of good work.
Thank you.
With that, we will adjourn this meeting at 4:40 PM. We got out 20 minutes early.